I was 12 years old when I realized that love in our family was a currency you had to earn. It wasn't something anyone said outright. It lived in the silences. In the way my father would nod approvingly when my brother Marcus brought home straight A's, but merely glance at mine before returning to his newspaper. In the way my mother's face would light up when Marcus walked into a room, while I had learned to enter quietly, to take up as little space as possible. Marcus was 2 years older, and those 2 years might as well have been a lifetime of accumulated favor. He had my father's strong jaw and my mother's sharp intelligence, packaged in a confidence that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. I was softer, quieter. I preferred books to boardrooms, art to arguments. In a family that valued power and presence, I was a whisper in a world of declarations. Our house was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that appeared in architecture magazines, all clean lines and marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in too much light. It never felt warm. Even in summer, even with the fireplace burning, there was a coldness to it that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a house designed to impress, not to comfort, a showpiece, not a home. My father built his wealth from nothing, a fact he reminded us of constantly. He started with a single construction site and built an empire. Chen Development Corporation now had projects in 6 states, buildings that reshaped city skylines. He was proud of what he'd created, and he wanted someone to leave it to who would treat it with the same ruthless dedication he had. That someone was always going to be Marcus. I understood this early. Understood that my father was grooming Marcus to take over, teaching him the business from the time he was 14. Summer breaks were spent on construction sites, weekends in the office learning contracts and negotiations. My father would talk about the future of the company, and everyone knew he meant Marcus's future. I was never invited to those conversations. When I asked once, at 16, if I could learn about the business too, my father had looked at me with something like confusion. "Why would you want to do that, Lily?" he'd asked, not unkindly, but with genuine bewilderment. "You're going to college. You'll study something you enjoy. Marcus needs to learn this. It's his responsibility." Responsibility. That word became the explanation for everything. Marcus got the larger bedroom because he needed space to study business materials. Marcus got the newer car because he needed reliable transportation to job sites. Marcus got my parents' attention because he was carrying the weight of the family legacy. And what was I carrying? Nothing that mattered, apparently. I learned to be okay with it, or at least, I learned to pretend. I went to college, studied art history, got my degree. I moved into a small apartment across town, worked at a museum making barely enough to cover rent. I dated occasionally, never seriously. I attended family dinners once a month where the conversation revolved around Marcus's latest business achievement, while I smiled and nodded and felt myself disappearing a little more each time. Marcus, to his credit, was never cruel about it. He didn't lord his position over me. He was actually kind in his way, checking in on me, offering to help with rent when he knew I was struggling. But there was always an undercurrent of pity in his kindness, as if he were the successful one helping out his less fortunate sister. And maybe that's what I was. Our parents aged the way wealthy people do, gracefully with the help of good doctors and better skincare. But time catches everyone eventually. My father's heart started giving him trouble in his late 60s. My mother developed complications from diabetes she'd ignored for too long. They were 71 and 68 when the car accident happened. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel on the interstate. My parents were coming back from their vacation home upstate. They died instantly, the police told us. They didn't suffer. As if that made it better. as if the speed of death could somehow lessen the permanence of it. I was 31 years old, and suddenly I was an orphan. The word felt strange, childish, inappropriate for someone my age. But that's what I was. The funeral was elaborate. My father would have hated the fuss, but Marcus insisted. 500 people attended, colleagues and business associates and people I'd never met who all claimed to have known my parents well. Everyone kept telling me how sorry they were, how wonderful my parents were, how they'd left such a legacy. I smiled and thanked them and felt nothing but numbness. Marcus handled everything, the arrangements, the obituaries, the endless phone calls. He was good in a crisis, efficient and composed. I let him take control because I didn't have the energy to argue, and because this was what he'd been trained for his whole life, to take charge, to lead, to decide. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Marcus and I sat in the office of Bernard Chen, my father's lawyer and no relation despite the shared last name. Bernard was ancient, had been my father's attorney for 40 years. He wore a suit that looked older than me and had the kind of formal manner that made everything feel like a ceremony. "I'll keep this brief," Bernard said, opening a folder. "Your parents were very clear about their wishes. The entirety of the estate, including all financial assets, properties, and controlling interest in Chen Development Corporation, is to be left to Marcus Chen. This includes the family home, all investment accounts, and business holdings." I felt the words land but couldn't quite process them. The entirety. To Marcus, Bernard continued. "To Lily Chen, a sum of $50,000 is bequeathed, to be paid out in a lump sum within 30 days of probate." $50,000? It sounded like a lot until you realized the estate was worth somewhere north of 40 million. 50,000 was a rounding error. It was a tip. It was what you'd leave to a loyal housekeeper, not your daughter. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "Everything goes to Marcus?" Bernard looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Yes. Your parents felt that Marcus was better positioned to manage the estate and continue the family business. The 50,000 is meant to provide you with some financial security." Some financial security. 6 months of rent, maybe a year if I was careful, while Marcus got everything. I looked at my brother. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight. "Lily," he started. "It's fine," I said, standing up. "Thank you, Bernard." I walked out before anyone could see my face, before the numbness could crack and reveal whatever was underneath. I drove home on autopilot, parked my car, walked up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, closed the door behind me, and finally let myself feel it. Not anger, not yet, just a crushing sense of being erased, of being told in the most official way possible that I had mattered less, that my entire life, all 31 years of it, had been worth $50,000, while my brother's was worth everything else. Marcus called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next day and the day after that. Finally, he showed up at my apartment. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "About what?" I asked, not moving aside to let him in. "About the will, about what happened." "What's there to talk about? Dad left you everything. It's his choice." "Lily, I know this isn't fair." "Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. Since when has anything in our family been about fair? This is just more of the same, Marcus. You get everything. You always have. At least now it's official." "Let me help you," he said. "I can give you money, help you buy a place, whatever you need." "I don't want your charity." I was surprised by how calm my voice was. "I don't want anything from you." "You're my sister." Am I? Because I spent my whole life being the other one, the less important one, the one who didn't matter enough to include in the business or the decisions or apparently the inheritance. So forgive me if I don't feel very sisterly right now. His face hardened. "I didn't write the will." "No, but you didn't exactly fight it either, did you?" "You didn't stand in that office and say, 'This isn't right, Lily should get half.' You just sat there and accepted it, just like you've accepted every other advantage you've gotten your entire life." "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair, Marcus. You of all people should know that. You've benefited from it enough." I closed the door on his face and locked it. He knocked for a while, then left. I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. Part of me expected him to keep trying, to push his way back into my life with his offers of help and his guilty conscience. But he stayed away, and I was grateful. I needed space to figure out how to feel about everything. About my parents choosing him. About a lifetime of being second place finally being codified in legal documents. The $50,000 appeared in my account exactly 30 days after the reading. I stared at the number on my banking app, this consolation prize, this token amount. I could quit my job at the museum maybe, travel for a while, go back to school. Or I could just keep living my small, quiet life and let the money sit there as proof that I'd existed in my parents' thoughts, if only barely. I did none of those things. Instead, I became obsessed with understanding why. Why had my parents left everything to Marcus? Was it really just because he was more responsible? Because he'd learned the business? Or was there something else, something I'd missed? I started going through everything I had from the house. When we'd cleaned out our childhood home, or rather, when Marcus had cleaned it out and I'd taken a few boxes of personal items, I hadn't looked closely at what I'd grabbed. Photo albums, some of my old books, a few of my mother's scarves that still smelled like her perfume. And papers. Random papers I'd shoved into boxes without sorting them. Now I laid everything out on my living room floor and went through it systematically. Most of it was mundane. Old report cards, birthday cards from relatives, programs from school plays I'd been in. Artifacts of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. But in one box, underneath a stack of my mother's recipes, I found a folder I didn't remember packing. It was unlabeled, just a plain manila folder that had been shoved to the bottom. Inside were documents, financial statements from 20 years ago. Letters from attorneys I didn't recognize. And at the very bottom, a copy of a different will. My hands shook as I read it. This will was dated 15 years ago. In it, my parents had split everything evenly between Marcus and me, 50-50. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. The business would either be run jointly or sold if we couldn't agree. Everything equal. There was a notepaper clipped to it in my father's handwriting. Updated provisions, discussed with Margaret. This feels right. Both children provided for equally. Final copy with Bernard Chen. I made copies of everything, stored the originals in a safe deposit box I opened specifically for this purpose. I read through every document multiple times, looking for clues. The old will had been witnessed by 2 of my father's business associates, their signatures clear and dated. The new will had been witnessed by people I'd never heard of. I called Bernard Chen's office and made an appointment, claiming I needed clarification on some estate details. His secretary scheduled me for the following Thursday. Bernard's office hadn't changed since the reading. Same old furniture, same law books lining the walls, same formal stuffiness. He greeted me with polite surprise. "Lily, I wasn't expecting to hear from you again so soon. Is there a problem with the distribution?" "No, the money came through fine," I said, sitting down without being invited. "I wanted to ask you about the will itself, about the decision to leave everything to Marcus." "I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Your parents were very clear about their intentions." "Were they? Because I found something interesting." I pulled out a copy of the old will. This is dated 15 years ago. In it, my parents split everything equally between me and Marcus. You drew it up. Your signature is right there. Bernard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Yes, that was an earlier version. People update their wills all the time as circumstances change." What circumstances changed? What happened in the last 15 years that made my parents decide I was worth 99% less than my brother? I can't speak to your parents' reasoning. I can only execute their wishes as documented. But you knew them for 40 years. You must have some idea why they made such a drastic change. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully, "Your brother has been very involved in the family business for many years. Your father felt strongly that the company needed to remain under unified control. Dividing it could have caused complications. So sell it and split the proceeds. That's what the old will said to do if we couldn't agree. Why change it so drastically?" "I really can't say, Lily. I'm sorry." But he could say. I could see it in his face. He knew something he wasn't telling me. "Who else has a copy of the new will?" I asked. "The only official copy is with my office. Your brother received a copy after the reading, as did you." "What about before my parents died? Who knew about the changes?" Bernard's jaw tightened. "That information is confidential." "Between my parents and their lawyer, yes, but they're dead, and I'm their daughter. I think I have a right to know if someone influenced them to change their will." "I've said all I can say on the matter, Lily. If you have concerns about the validity of the will, you're welcome to consult with your own attorney, but I assure you everything was done properly and legally." I left his office feeling like I'd hit a wall. He was hiding something, protecting someone, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. I started digging into the timeline. 6 months before my parents died, what was happening? I scrolled through my phone, looking at old texts and emails, trying to reconstruct that period. Marcus had been dealing with some kind of business crisis, I remembered. Something about a development project that had gone wrong. Cost overruns, legal issues. I hadn't paid much attention at the time because I never paid attention to the business details. But my father had been stressed about it. I remembered him looking tired, worried in a way I rarely saw. I called my mother's best friend, Helen Wu. She and my mother had been close for 30 years, had coffee together every week. If anyone knew what had been going on in my parents' lives, it would be Helen. "Lily," she said when she answered, her voice warm with sympathy. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "I'm okay," I lied. "Helen, can I ask you something about my parents? About the time before they died?" "Of course. Anything." "Do you remember them talking about updating their will about 6 months before the accident?" There was a pause. "Your mother did mention something about that. She was troubled by it." "Troubled how?" "She didn't go into details, but she said Marcus had brought them some concerns about the business, about what would happen if something happened to them. He had apparently hired some consultant who'd done an analysis showing that splitting the company between 2 owners could cause serious problems. Legal liability issues, management conflicts, that sort of thing." My chest tightened. "Marcus brought them these concerns?" Yes, he seemed very worried about it, your mother said. He'd presented them with all this research and data. Your father was convinced that leaving everything to one person was the only way to protect the company. And my mother? What did she think? Helen was quiet for a moment. She wasn't comfortable with it. She felt it wasn't fair to you. But your father was adamant, and Marcus kept pushing. He said it was about protecting the family legacy, about making sure the company didn't fall apart. Eventually, your mother agreed, but she wasn't happy about it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Helen, did my mother ever mention any specific documents or research that Marcus showed them? No, just that it was very official looking. Legal opinions, financial projections, that kind of thing. Why? Is something wrong? I don't know yet. Thank you, Helen. This helps a lot. After I hung up, I sat very still in my apartment and let the pieces fall into place. Marcus had convinced my parents to change their will. He'd brought them research, data, legal opinions that said splitting the estate would be disastrous. He'd scared them into leaving everything to him. But was the research real, or had he fabricated it? Had he manipulated our parents in their last months of life to cut me out of everything? I needed proof. I needed to see exactly what Marcus had shown them, what lies he might have told. The problem was, I had no way to get into Marcus's files. He'd moved into the family house after the funeral, our childhood home with all its cold marble and too much light. I hadn't been there since the will reading. I wasn't even sure if I'd be welcome. But I knew the house. I'd grown up there, and I knew where my father kept important documents, in his study, in the same massive oak desk he'd had for as long as I could remember. I waited 2 weeks, watching Marcus's patterns. He posted on social media occasionally, his life documented in careful snapshots. Business meetings, dinners with clients, a weekend trip to the company's newest property. He was busy, important, exactly what our father had trained him to be. The following Tuesday, I saw he'd posted about flying to Seattle for a conference. 3 days, according to his schedule. I still had my key to the family house. Marcus had never asked for it back, and I'd never offered. It felt strange, letting myself in through the front door in the middle of the afternoon. The house looked the same, but different, like a museum of my childhood. Marcus had kept most of the furniture, though he'd added some of his own touches. Photos of himself at various business events, awards and plaques I didn't recognize. I went straight to my father's study. The desk was locked, but I knew where the key was hidden, inside a fake book on the shelf, one of those hollow containers that looked like a thick volume of something impressive. My father thought he was being clever. I'd known about it since I was 16. Inside the desk were files, so many files, business documents, contracts, financial statements. I started going through them systematically, looking for anything from 6 months before my parents died. I found it in a folder labeled estate planning. Inside were documents that matched what Helen had described. Legal opinions about the risks of shared ownership. Financial projections showing potential losses if the company were divided. Letters from business consultants warning about management conflicts and liability issues. They looked official, professional, convincing. They were also complete fabrications. I could tell because I'd spent enough time in my museum job learning how to spot forged documents. The dates were wrong. Some of the letters were supposedly written by attorneys who, according to a quick internet search, hadn't worked at those firms at the time. The financial projections used data that didn't match the company's actual performance reports, which I found in another folder. The legal opinions cited cases that didn't exist. I checked. I spent 3 hours in that study, cross-referencing everything, and it was all fake. All of it. Marcus had created an entire fictional paper trail to convince our parents that leaving everything to him was the only reasonable option. He'd forged documents, he'd lied, he'd manipulated our elderly parents into cutting me out of everything I should have inherited. I took pictures of everything, every fake document, every forged signature, every fabricated legal opinion. I made sure to photograph them still in their folders, with timestamps visible on my phone. Evidence, irrefutable evidence of what he'd done. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the desk, replaced the key in its hiding spot, and left the house. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, trying to understand what I'd discovered. My brother, the golden child, the responsible one, the heir to everything, was a fraud and a thief. He'd stolen my inheritance through lies and forged documents. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I could go to the police. What Marcus had done was fraud, possibly elder abuse, definitely illegal. But that would mean dragging everything through the courts, through public scrutiny. It would mean destroying the family name, the company my father had built, everything. And if I was honest with myself, I didn't want that. I didn't want revenge that would hurt the innocent people who worked for the company, who depended on it. I didn't want to become the kind of person who burned everything down out of spite. But I also couldn't let Marcus just get away with it. I spent 3 days thinking about it. 3 days of barely sleeping, of turning it over in my mind from every angle. What would hurt Marcus most wasn't losing the money or even the company. It was losing the image, the reputation, the belief that he was the responsible one, the trustworthy one, the golden child who deserved everything he'd been given. That's when I remembered the board meeting. Chen Development Corporation had a board of directors, obviously. My father had assembled it years ago, trusted advisors, longtime business associates, a few family friends. They met quarterly to review company performance and make strategic decisions. The next meeting was in 2 weeks. Marcus, as the new CEO and majority owner, would be presenting his vision for the company's future. It was his moment to prove he could fill my father's shoes, to show everyone that he'd earned the legacy he'd inherited. I made some calls, reached out to a few board members I'd met over the years at various family functions, mentioned casually that I'd found some old documents while sorting through family papers, things that might be relevant to the company's history. Would it be possible for me to attend the meeting, just to observe, to feel connected to my father's legacy? They were sympathetic. Of course I could attend. I was Richard Chen's daughter, after all. My presence would be welcome. I prepared carefully, made copies of all the evidence, organized it chronologically, created a clear narrative of what Marcus had done. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting, just sat up reviewing everything, making sure I had every detail right. The meeting was held in the conference room of the company's headquarters, a building my father had designed himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, that same cold elegance that had defined our house. 15 people sat around the table. Board members, senior executives, Marcus at the head. He looked surprised when I walked in, but covered it quickly. "Lily, I didn't know you were coming." "The board invited me," I said simply. "I hope that's all right." "Of course." His smile was tight. "Please, sit." I took a chair near the middle of the table, not too prominent, but not in the back either. I watched as Marcus went through his presentation, his vision for expansion, new markets, strategic initiatives. He was good at this, confident and articulate. I could see the board members nodding, impressed. When he finished, there was applause. Then the chairman, Gregory Winters, spoke up. "Excellent presentation, Marcus. Your father would be proud." Before we moved to questions, I believe Lily had something she wanted to share with the board. Something about documents she found? All eyes turned to me. Marcus's expression was confused, slightly concerned. He had no idea what was coming. I stood up slowly. Thank you, Gregory. Yes, I found some interesting documents while going through my parents' papers. Specifically, documents related to the estate planning that happened before they died. I'm sure everyone here knows that my parents left the entirety of their estate to Marcus. At the time, I was told this was because he was more involved in the business, better positioned to manage it. Marcus has mentioned several times how our parents felt strongly about keeping the company under unified control. I pulled out the folder I'd brought. What I discovered is that Marcus presented our parents with research and legal opinions showing how dangerous it would be to split ownership of the company. Documents from attorneys, financial consultants, business analysts, all very official, all very convincing. I started passing out copies around the table. The problem is, these documents are fake. The attorneys listed don't exist at these firms. The cases cited in the legal opinions are fabricated. The financial projections use data that doesn't match the company's actual performance. Everything Marcus showed our parents to convince them to change their will was falsified. The room had gone completely silent. Marcus was on his feet. That's absurd! Lily, what are you doing? I'm telling the truth. My voice was calm, steady. I have the originals of these documents. I also have a copy of my parents' previous will, the one drawn up 15 years ago that split everything equally between us. 6 months before they died, Marcus convinced them to change it. He did so using forged documents and manufactured evidence. I pulled out more papers. These are the real financial statements from that time period. These are confirmations from the law firms that no such attorneys work there. These are the actual cases that were supposedly cited, showing they have nothing to do with business ownership structures. I've verified everything. Marcus committed fraud to steal my inheritance. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Why would I need to forge anything? I was always going to inherit the business. Dad was grooming me for it my entire life. Yes, you were. But that's not the same as inheriting everything. The original will split the estate 50-50. You would have gotten the business, but I would have gotten half of its value, half of the house, half of the other assets. You decided that wasn't enough. You wanted it all. Gregory was reading through the documents, his face growing darker. Other board members were doing the same, passing papers back and forth, whispering to each other. I'd like to hear Marcus's explanation, Gregory said finally. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table. My father wanted me to have full control of the company. He told me that himself many times. Whatever documents I showed them simply confirmed what he already believed. So you did show them these documents? Another board member asked. I presented research, yes, to help them understand the implications of their choices. But I didn't forge anything. Lily is obviously bitter about the will. She's making this up. I'm not making anything up, I said quietly. I have proof of every claim I've made. Phone numbers of the law firms to verify. Timestamps on the documents showing when they were created. Financial records that prove the projections were false. I've done my homework, Marcus. Every single piece of evidence I have is verifiable. I turned to Gregory. I'm not here to destroy the company. I'm not even here to contest the will legally, though I suspect I could. I'm here because this board deserves to know what kind of person is leading Chen Development. Someone who would forge documents and manipulate his own elderly parents. someone who would steal from his sister and call it inheritance. "This is unbelievable," Marcus said, but he sounded desperate now rather than confident. "You're trying to sabotage me because you're jealous." "I'm not jealous, Marcus. I'm disappointed. I spent my whole life watching you get everything while I got nothing, and I learned to live with that. But this wasn't you earning something. This was you lying and stealing, and I can't let that stand." Gregory stood up. "I think we need to take a recess. Marcus, I'd like you to step out while the board reviews these documents more carefully. Lily, we'll need you to provide all of your evidence for independent verification." "I have everything ready," I said. "Original documents, digital copies, contact information for verification, whatever you need." Marcus looked around the table at faces that had gone from admiring to suspicious. He'd lost them. I could see the moment he realized it, the moment his carefully constructed image cracked apart. "You have no right," he said to me, his voice low and venomous. "You have no right to come in here and destroy everything Dad built." "Dad built it," I said. "You just inherited it through fraud. There's a difference." He stormed out. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The rest of the meeting lasted 3 hours. I provided every piece of evidence, answered every question. The board verified what they could on the spot, made calls, checked records. By the end, there was no doubt. Marcus had done exactly what I'd accused him of. Gregory pulled me aside before I left. "This is unprecedented. We'll need to conduct a full investigation, bring in attorneys. But Lily, you should know, if everything you've told us is accurate, and it appears to be, there will be serious consequences. For Marcus and possibly for the company." "I understand. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I just wanted the truth to be known." "The truth matters," he said. "Your father always believed that. I'm sorry he didn't live to see this." I wasn't sure if my father would have been sorry. He'd believed Marcus was perfect, right up until the end. Maybe that's why Marcus thought he could get away with it. The news broke within a week. Not because I leaked it. I never talked to the press. But these things get out. Whispers at first, then articles. CEO under investigation for estate fraud. Chen development in turmoil after inheritance scandal. Golden child's dark secret, how Marcus Chen allegedly stole his sister's inheritance. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, friends I hadn't heard from in years, distant relatives suddenly concerned about my well-being. I ignored almost all of it. Helen Wu came by with food and sympathy, told me my mother would have been proud of me for standing up for myself. I wasn't sure about that, but I appreciated the sentiment. Marcus tried to call a few times. I never answered. What would be the point? He'd already said everything that mattered when he'd called me jealous and bitter. He couldn't understand that this wasn't about jealousy. It was about justice, about refusing to be erased. The investigation took 3 months. In that time, Marcus was suspended from his position at the company. The board brought in interim leadership. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors tried to figure out what was happening. It was messy and public and exactly what I'd hoped to avoid. But it was also necessary. The final report confirmed everything. Marcus had forged multiple documents, misrepresented facts to our parents, and committed fraud to manipulate the will. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. Criminal charges were filed. The will was contested in probate court. I didn't want to see Marcus destroyed. Despite everything, he was still my brother. But I wanted him held accountable, wanted him to understand that actions have consequences even for golden children. The legal settlement took another 6 months to finalize. In the end, the estate was divided according to the original will, 50-50. The house was sold, the proceeds split. The business was restructured with professional management, and both Marcus and I became equal shareholders with no operational control. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. Marcus pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for probation and community service. No jail time, but a permanent record. His reputation in the business world was destroyed. Some people still believed he'd been the victim of a vindictive sister, but most understood the truth. I saw him once more, about a year after everything ended. We'd been called to sign some final documents at Bernard Chen's office. The old lawyer looked tired, like the whole affair had aged him. He'd been reprimanded by the Bar Association for not questioning the suspicious documents more carefully. He was retiring at the end of the month. Marcus and I sat in the same office where we'd learned about the original will. He looked different. Thinner, older, the confidence gone from his posture. We signed the papers in silence, didn't look at each other. But as we were leaving, he stopped me in the hallway. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said. His voice was quiet, almost defeated. "I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that Dad wanted me to have full control, that you didn't care about the business anyway. I didn't think of it as stealing from you. I thought of it as protecting what was mine." "It was never yours," I said. "Not all of it." "That's what you never understood." I know that now. He looked at me directly for the first time. "I'm sorry, Lily, for everything, for our whole lives, for making you feel invisible, for taking what wasn't mine to take." "Okay," I said, because what else was there to say? His apology didn't undo the damage, didn't give me back the parents who'd loved him more, didn't return the years I'd spent feeling like I didn't matter. "Will you ever forgive me?" I thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe someday, but not today." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Take care of yourself." "You too, Marcus." I walked away and didn't look back. With my share of the inheritance, I bought a small house in a neighborhood with actual trees and character instead of marble and glass. I quit the museum job and started freelance consulting for art galleries and private collections. I traveled to places I'd only read about: Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. I started painting again, something I'd given up in college because it wasn't practical. I started living, in other words. Not the life my parents had envisioned for me, and certainly not in Marcus's shadow. Just my own life, built on my own terms with resources that had finally been fairly distributed. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never found that old will, if I just accepted the $50,000 and moved on with my life, nursing my resentment quietly. Would I be happier? Would Marcus still be the golden child, living his charmed life? But then I remembered that moment in the board meeting. The way Marcus's face had changed when he realized I knew everything. The way the truth had stripped away all his carefully constructed lies. The way justice had felt, quiet and powerful and right. I don't regret exposing him, not for a second. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate my brother for what he did. The answer is complicated. I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy I don't want to waste on him. And hate? Hate would mean he still had power over me, still occupied space in my heart that I'd rather fill with other things. What I feel is something closer to sadness. Sadness for what our family could have been if love hadn't been rationed like a scarce resource. Sadness for parents who died never knowing their son had lied to them in their final months. Sadness for Marcus, who had so much handed to him, but still felt the need to take more, as if enough was never enough. I ran into Helen Wu at a coffee shop about 18 months after everything settled. She hugged me tight, held on longer than usual. "Your mother would be so conflicted," she said when we sat down with our drinks. "Proud of you for standing up for yourself, heartbroken about Marcus, angry at herself for not seeing it." "Do you think she suspected," I asked, "that something wasn't right about the will?" Helen was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I think she knew in her gut that it was wrong, but your father was so convinced and Marcus was so persuasive. It's easy to doubt your instincts when everyone around you seems certain." She looked at me directly. "Your mother loved you, Lily. She wasn't good at showing it, and she let your father's favoritism shape too much of how she treated you both. But she loved you. I want you to know that." "I do know," I said, and I meant it. My mother's love had been imperfect, diluted by my father's expectations and Marcus's shine. But it had existed. I could see that now, with distance and perspective. It just hadn't been enough to overcome a lifetime of patterns. "What about Marcus?" Helen asked. "Do you ever hear from him?" "No, I think that's better for both of us." I traced the rim of my cup. "He's working for a consulting firm now, I heard. Doing okay, rebuilding. I hope he is. I don't wish him ill. I just don't want him in my life." "That's very mature of you." "It's self-preservation," I corrected. "Maturity would be forgiveness and reconciliation. I'm not there yet. Maybe never will be. But I can wish him well from a distance." The truth was, I thought about Marcus more than I wanted to admit. Not with longing or anger, but with a kind of anthropological curiosity. How did someone become the person he'd become? Was it the constant praise, the weight of expectations, the belief that he was entitled to everything? Or was there something darker in him, something that had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? I'd never know. And I'd made peace with that uncertainty. My father's business associates sometimes reached out, checking in or inviting me to industry events. I went occasionally, more out of respect for my father's memory than any real interest in construction and development. At one such event, Gregory Winters pulled me aside. "The company's doing well," he told me. "Better than expected, actually. New leadership brought fresh perspectives. Your father built something solid. It survived the scandal." "I'm glad," I said, and I was. I hadn't wanted to destroy what my father created, only to expose what Marcus had corrupted. "You could be more involved, you know," Gregory continued. "You're a major shareholder. You have every right to a board seat if you want it." I considered it for about 3 seconds. "No, thank you. That was never my world. I'm happy being a silent partner." "Fair enough, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind." He paused, looking at me with something like respect. "What you did took courage, not just exposing Marcus, but doing it the way you did. You could have gone to the press first, made it ugly and public. Instead, you brought it to the board, gave us a chance to handle it properly. That showed real integrity." "I just wanted the truth to come out," I said. "How it came out mattered less than that it did." But that wasn't entirely true. How it came out had mattered to me. I'd wanted Marcus exposed in front of the people whose opinions he valued most. I'd wanted him to see their faces change when they realized what he'd done. I'd wanted his perfect image shattered in the place where he'd built his entire identity. Was that cruel? Maybe, but it was also proportional. He'd taken everything from me through deception. I'd taken his reputation through truth. There was a justice in that symmetry. I started dating someone seriously about 2 years after everything settled. David was a teacher, patient and kind, with no connection to my family or my past. He knew the broad strokes of what had happened. It was public record, after all, but he never asked for details I wasn't ready to share. He let me reveal myself slowly, in my own time, without pressure or judgment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked one night as we lay in bed, the question coming from nowhere. "Exposing your brother, going through all of that." "No," I said without hesitation. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that he put me in a position where I had to choose between silence and justice. But I don't regret choosing justice. Even though it destroyed your relationship with him?" Our relationship was already destroyed. It had been destroyed for years, maybe our whole lives. I just finally acknowledged it. I turned to face him. "You can't destroy something that was never really built. Marcus and I were siblings, but we were never truly brother and sister. Not in any way that mattered." "That's sad." "It is," I agreed, "but it's also freeing. I spent so much of my life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I didn't fit. Now I get to build my own family on my own terms, starting with people who actually see me." "I see you. I know. That's why you're here." 3 years after the scandal, I got an unexpected phone call from Marcus's attorney. He had something to give me, he said. Something Marcus had asked him to deliver. We met at a neutral coffee shop. The attorney was young, professional, treating this like any other transaction. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Chen asked me to give you this. He didn't say what it contained, just that you should have it." Inside was a letter, Marcus's handwriting, the same neat script he'd always had. "Lily," it began, "I don't expect you to read this, and I have no right to ask you to, but I needed to write it anyway. I've spent the last 3 years in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did, not just the forged documents and the will, but everything before that, why I let you be invisible, why I took everything without question, why I felt entitled to more than my share. The therapist says it's complicated, something about perfectionism and fear of failure, and using your smallness to make myself feel bigger. I don't know if that's true. What I do know is that I hurt you, not just at the end, but our entire lives. I made you feel like you didn't matter, and then I took the last thing that said you did. I can't undo any of it. I can't give you back your childhood or your parents' equal love. I can't restore your faith in family or make up for all the ways I failed you as a brother. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I took from you, what I never gave you, what I destroyed through my selfishness. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did to you. Not just the fraud, but the lifetime of erasure that made the fraud feel justified in my mind. You deserved better. You always deserved better. I hope you've built a life that makes you happy. I hope you found people who see your worth. I hope you never think of me at all. Marcus. I read it twice, sitting in my car in the parking lot. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. It was a good apology. Sincere, specific, without excuses or requests for absolution. The kind of apology that showed real reflection and growth. It still didn't change anything. Marcus understanding what he'd done was important for him. It was part of his healing, his journey to becoming a better person. But it didn't erase the damage, didn't give me back what I'd lost. An apology, no matter how genuine, can't restore stolen time or heal wounds that have scarred over. I kept the letter, though. Put it in a box with the other documents from that time, the wills, the forged papers, the evidence I gathered. Artifacts of a war I'd won but wished had never been necessary. David asked me once if I'd ever want children. We were watching a family at the park, parents playing with their kids, everyone laughing and relaxed. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not sure I know how to be part of a healthy family. I never really saw one up close. You could learn, he said. You could build something different. Maybe. I watched the family pack up their picnic, the easy affection between them. But I think I'd need to fully let go of my own childhood first, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. That's okay. We have time. Time. That was the gift I'd given myself by exposing Marcus's lies. Time to heal. Time to grow. Time to become someone who wasn't defined by what she'd lacked. Every day I woke up and chose who I wanted to be, free from the shadow I'd lived in for so long. On the 5th anniversary of my parents' death, I visited their graves for the first time since the funeral. I'd avoided it before, not ready to face whatever emotions might surface. But I woke up that morning feeling like it was time. The cemetery was peaceful, well-maintained, with old trees providing shade over the headstones. My parents were buried side by side, their names carved in matching granite. Simple, elegant, expensive. Very much in keeping with how they'd lived. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, I settled on the truth. I wish things had been different, I said quietly. I wish you'd loved me as much as you loved Marcus. I wish you'd seen me clearly, seen what he was doing before you died. But you didn't, and I can't change that. What I can do is live my life in a way that honors what I needed from you but never got. I can be seen. I can take up space. I can refuse to be diminished by anyone ever again. Marcus stole from me using lies. I took back what was mine using the truth. I think you'd understand that, Dad. You always said the truth was what mattered in business. It turns out it matters in family, too. I'm okay now, more than okay. I'm building something real and honest and mine. I hope wherever you are, you can be proud of that, even if you couldn't be proud of me when you were alive. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough over the years. This was just a statement of fact, a closing of accounts. I'd said what I needed to say. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Lily Chen? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes, who's this? My name is Patricia Lynn. I'm a producer for a podcast about family dynamics and inheritance. I'd love to talk to you about your experience with your brother and the estate fraud case. We're doing a series on... I'm not interested, I said, cutting her off gently. Thank you, but no. I understand it's difficult to talk about, but your story could help other people who've been... It's not about it being difficult. It's about it being mine. My story, my experience, my healing. I'm not interested in making it public entertainment. That's not what we... Thank you for thinking of me. I hope your podcast goes well. Goodbye. I hung up and blocked the number. There would be others I knew, people who wanted to dissect what happened, turn it into content, use it as a cautionary tale or an inspiring story, or whatever narrative they needed, but it wasn't theirs to tell. What happened between Marcus and me, what I discovered and how I responded, that was ours. I'd shared it with the people who needed to know for justice to be served. I didn't need to share it with the world. My life wasn't a story for other people's consumption. It was just my life, messy and complicated and ultimately mine. I got married a year later. Small wedding, close friends only. Helen Wu attended, crying happy tears. Some cousins came, distant relatives who'd never been part of the inner circle of favoritism. My father's business associates sent gifts but didn't attend. They'd moved on, as people do. Marcus sent a card, just a simple note. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope you find all the happiness you deserve. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. It went in the box with the letter, with all the other artifacts of our complicated history. David asked me once if I'd want Marcus at the wedding. He's still your brother, technically. Some people might. No, I said firmly. This day is about moving forward, not revisiting the past. Marcus and I have made our peace in our own way, but that doesn't mean he gets to be part of my new life. Okay, David said simply. That was one of the things I loved about him. He never pushed, never questioned my boundaries, never tried to fix relationships that I decided were better left alone. The wedding was perfect. Not magazine cover perfect like my parents would have wanted. Real perfect. Messy and joyful and full of people who actually knew me, who'd chosen me, and whom I'd chosen in return. We danced until midnight, ate too much cake, laughed until our faces hurt. It was everything a wedding should be. And Marcus's absence didn't leave a hole because he'd never really been present in my life in any meaningful way. You can't miss what you never had. Sometimes I wonder what Marcus's life is like now, if he ever married, if he's happy, if he's become the better person his apology suggested he was trying to be. I could find out easily enough. A quick internet search would tell me. But I don't look. Whatever healing he's doing, whatever life he's building, it's separate from mine. We're like parallel lines that once intersected catastrophically and have since diverged. Maybe that's how it should be. I think about forgiveness sometimes, whether I owe it to him, whether I owe it to myself. My therapist, yes, I got one too after everything, says forgiveness isn't required for healing, that you can move on without absolving someone of what they did. Forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the burden of anger, she told me. But you're not angry anymore. You've already released yourself. What Marcus needs from you, forgiveness, absolution, a relationship, that's his journey, not yours. She's right. I don't need to forgive Marcus to be free of him. I'm already free. I've built a life he has no part in, filled it with people who see me clearly, created a version of myself that exists completely independent of his shadow. That's its own kind of victory. 5 years after the wedding, David and I had a daughter. We named her Eleanor, after no one in particular, giving her a name that was entirely her own. When I held her for the first time, I made a silent promise. She would never wonder if she was loved enough. She would never feel invisible. She would never have to fight for her worth. She would be seen, always. I think that's the real revenge, if you can call it that. Not destroying Marcus, not even exposing him, though that needed to happen. The real revenge is building a life so full and rich and honest that what he did to me becomes just one chapter in a much longer story. He took everything that could be measured, counted, divided up in a will. The house, the money, the business, the inheritance that should have been shared. But I took back something more valuable. I took my voice, my agency, my refusal to be diminished. I took the truth and used it as a weapon when I needed to, then set it down and walked away when justice was served. I took my life back and built it into something that belonged only to me. Eleanor will grow up knowing her mother fought for what was right, that she didn't let injustice stand, even when it would have been easier to walk away. that truth matters, that integrity matters, that standing up for yourself matters even when it's hard. She'll also grow up knowing that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose you, who see you, who make space for you in their lives. It's David with his patient kindness. It's Helen, who loved my mother and loves me. It's the friends I've gathered who know my whole story and love me anyway. That's the family I'm building, one based on truth instead of favoritism, on mutual respect instead of competition, on genuine love instead of conditional approval. Marcus can't take that from me. No one can. I saw him one last time, completely by accident. I was at a restaurant with David and Eleanor, celebrating her 3rd birthday. He was there with a woman I didn't recognize, laughing at something she'd said. He looked older, more weathered, but not unhappy. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers who used to be siblings. Then he gave me a small nod. Not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. That was enough. More than enough. As we left the restaurant, David carrying a sleepy Eleanor, I realized I felt nothing about seeing Marcus. No anger, no sadness, no curiosity about his life. Just a calm neutrality, the way you might feel seeing someone who once mattered but doesn't anymore. That's when I knew I'd finally let go of everything. "You okay?" David asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it completely. "I'm really, really okay." We drove home through the evening light, Eleanor asleep in her car seat, David's hand in mine. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who made herself small, who accepted scraps and called them enough. I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who'd fought for justice and built a life worth living. The journey from that girl to this woman had been long and painful. It had required confronting ugly truths, exposing family secrets, destroying relationships that were already broken but pretending to be whole. But I'd do it all again. Every difficult moment, every hard choice, every bit of pain that led to freedom. Because in the end, I didn't just get my fair share of an inheritance. I got something more valuable: myself, my voice, my life, my truth. He took everything that could be touched. I took everything that couldn't, the truth and my peace. And that, in the end, was worth more than any amount of money, any family business, any inheritance that could be divided up and doled out in a will. I am whole. I am free. I am seen. That's the best revenge of all.